The air on the vast Polish plain is thick with dust, the thunder of thousands of hooves, and the chilling sound of men chanting prayers before they kill. Two colossal armies face each other under the July sun. On one side, a sea of banners from across Eastern Europe. On the other, a disciplined, silent wall of white mantles, each adorned with a stark black cross. Suddenly, the white wall moves. With the precision of a perfectly engineered machine, the heavy cavalry of the Teutonic Knights begins its charge, their lances leveled, a wave of steel and faith set to crash upon their foes. For the men in the white cloaks, everything is on the line. This is not just a battle for territory, it is the ultimate test of their divine mandate. A loss here would mean the potential collapse of their monastic state, a 200-year project of conquest and conversion built on blood and stone. For their opponents, the combined forces of Poland and Lithuania, this is a fight for survival, a desperate push to break the iron grip of a neighbor that used the cross as a pretext for relentless expansion. The fate of the entire Baltic region hangs in this moment. At the heart of this steel tempest is Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen. He is the latest in a long line of warrior monks to lead the order of the Teutonic Knights. He is the embodiment of their pride, their discipline, and their unshakable belief in their own superiority. He watches his elite knights charge, confident that their faith, their German steel, and their superior tactics will once again carry the day against the seemingly disorganized horde before them. His decision to commit his forces is the pivot upon which history will turn. How did it come to this? How did an order of monks, founded to care for sick pilgrims in the distant Holy Land, become the most feared and dominant military power in Northern Europe? What was the strange and winding path that took these German knights from the sands of Acre to this bloody field in Grunwald, facing not pagans, but a Christian king? This is the story of the Teutonic Order, a tale of piety that curdled into power and a crusade that lost its way. The charge of the Teutonic Knights at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410 was a catastrophe. The Polish-Lithuanian forces weathered the initial assault, lured the knights in, and then enveloped them. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen was killed in the fray, and the flower of the order's chivalry was annihilated. The invincible aura of the knights was shattered in a single afternoon. To understand their fall, we must first understand their remarkable rise, a story that begins not in the cold forests of the north, but under the searing sun of the Middle East. The story begins in the late 12th century, during the Third Crusade. Amidst the brutal siege of the city of Acre, German crusaders established a field hospital to care for their sick and wounded countrymen. This humble brotherhood, dedicated to charity and healing, was the seed from which a mighty and terrible tree would grow. They were the brethren of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem, a name that spoke of piety and service, giving no hint of the conquerors they would soon become. Inspired by the powerful Templars and Hospitallers, this small brotherhood was militarized by a papal bull in 1198. They were transformed into a true military order, adopting the white mantle of the Templars but distinguishing it with a black cross. Their members were to be noble-born Germans, monks sworn to vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their new mission was to defend the Crusader states and protect Christian pilgrims, a holy calling that would soon find a new and far more profitable theater of operations. As the Crusader cause in the Holy Land began to wane, the Teutonic Knights, under the leadership of their visionary and ambitious Grand Master Hermann von Salza, began looking for opportunities elsewhere. Von Salza was a master diplomat, a trusted advisor to the Holy Roman Emperor, and he understood that the Order's future lay not in the dying Crusader states, but in carving out a domain of their own. An opportunity soon arose in a land of dark forests, swamps, and fierce pagan tribes. In 1226, Duke Conrad of Masovia, a Polish noble, made a fateful request. He was struggling to defend his lands from the raids of the pagan Old Prussians, a collection of Baltic tribes who had resisted all attempts at Christianization. He invited the Teutonic Knights to come to his aid, offering them the border territory of Chelmno land as a base of operations. To the knights, it must have seemed like a divine invitation, a new crusade against the heathens. But Hermann von Salza was no one's fool. He had seen how other military orders had become pawns of kings. Before committing, he secured a document from the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, the Golden Bull of Rimini. This controversial decree granted the order the right to possess not only Chelmno land, but any and all territories they conquered from the Prussians. They would be masters of their own domain, subject only to the authority of the Pope. A state was being born before a single sword was drawn in its name. The Prussian Crusade was not a single glorious war, but a long, brutal, and grinding campaign of conquest that spanned more than 50 years. The Prussians were not a unified nation, but a collection of clans, fighting fiercely in their native terrain of forests and marshes. They were a formidable foe who would not be easily broken. For the Teutonic Knights, this was a new kind of war, a far cry from the desert battles of the Holy Land. It was a war of attrition, settlement, and stone. The Knights' strategy was methodical and relentless. They would advance along rivers, build a primitive wooden fort, defend it against Prussian attacks, and then systematically replace it with a massive stone or brick castle in Ordensburg. These castles were fortresses, administrative centers, and monasteries all in one. They were nodes in a network of control, allowing the Knights to dominate the surrounding countryside, launch raids, and protect the German settlers they encouraged to colonize the conquered land. The conversion of the Prussians was often a brutal affair. While the order's stated mission was to bring Christianity to the pagans, their methods were conquest and forced submission. Baptism was often offered at the point of a sword. Those who resisted were killed, and those who converted but later rebelled were treated as apostates and shown no mercy. The Prussian people rose up in massive rebellions several times, most notably during the Great Prussian Uprising, but each time they were crushed with overwhelming force. The order did not just conquer the Prussians, they systematically erased their culture. Their sacred groves were cut down, their priests were killed, and their language and traditions were suppressed. The old Prussian nobility was either killed off or assimilated, while the common people were reduced to the status of serfs, bound to the land now owned by the order and its German colonists. By the end of the 13th century, Old Prussia had ceased to exist, replaced by the Teutonic Order's monastic state, the Ordensstaat. With Prussia subdued, the order built a state unlike any other in Europe. It was ruled by a religious oligarchy of knight brothers, administered with remarkable German efficiency. They controlled the lucrative Baltic trade in grain and amber, making the order incredibly wealthy. They built magnificent brick Gothic castles, cathedrals, and towns, transforming the wilderness into a prosperous, well-ordered domain. Their power seemed absolute, their state a testament to God's will. The jewel in their crown was the fortress of Marienburg, or Malbork. Originally a modest castle, it was expanded into the largest brick castle in the world, a breathtaking symbol of the order's power and wealth. It was the Grand Master's residence, a massive fortress, and the administrative heart of a thriving state. To stand before its towering red brick walls was to understand the scale of the Knights' ambition and the reality of their success. They had built a kingdom for themselves in the name of God. Yet a crusading order needs a crusade. With the Prussians conquered, the Knights turned their attention to the last great pagan power in Europe, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. For the next century, the order waged a perpetual, low-intensity war against the Lithuanians. These campaigns, known as Ryzen, became a kind of military tourism for knights from across Western Europe, who would journey to Prussia to join the Teutonic Knights in their holy war against the pagans. This constant warfare kept the order's military machine well-oiled, and its crusading purpose clear. However, it also brought them into increasing conflict with their original sponsors, the Kingdom of Poland. The Poles had their own interests in the region, and grew to resent the Knights' powerful and aggressive state on their border. The order, which had been invited to be a protector, had become a predator, seizing Polish lands and acting with an arrogance born of immense power. The entire justification for the Teutonic Order's presence in the Baltic rested on one simple fact: the existence of a pagan enemy. In 1386, that justification vanished overnight. In a brilliant geopolitical move, the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jagiella, agreed to convert to Christianity. He married the young Queen Jadwiga of Poland, uniting their two vast realms and becoming King W. Ladislaw II Jagiello of Poland. The last pagan state in Europe was now Christian. This event, the Union of Cruo, created a geopolitical earthquake. The Teutonic Knights' holy war was rendered obsolete. Their primary enemy was now their Christian brother, and their crusade had lost its divine purpose. But the order had grown too powerful, too wealthy, and too entrenched to simply fade away. They refused to accept the conversion as genuine, continuing to paint the Lithuanians as heathens and maintaining their aggressive stance. The crusade was now transparently a land grab. The stage was now set for a major conflict. The newly united Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a massive and powerful entity, capable of challenging the Teutonic Order directly. The dispute was no longer about faith, but about land, trade, and power. The Knights, blinded by a century of victories and a deep-seated institutional arrogance, failed to recognize the gravity of the shift. They continued to treat Poland and Lithuania with contempt, underestimating their combined strength. Tensions simmered for 2 decades, marked by diplomatic clashes and border skirmishes. The Knights seized disputed territories, confident that their superior military and the political support they enjoyed in Western Europe would protect them. They believed their own legend, that they were an invincible force of God's will. This institutional hubris would prove to be their fatal flaw, leading them directly to the fields of Grunwald. By 1409, open war was inevitable. The Great War, as it would become known, was about to begin. Both sides spent the next year gathering their forces for a decisive confrontation. The Knights called upon their allies and mercenary captains from across the German states in Western Europe. The Polish-Lithuanian alliance rallied troops from every corner of their vast, diverse realms, including Poles, Lithuanians, Ruthenians, and even a contingent of Tatar horsemen. This brings us back to that fateful day, July 15, 1410. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, in a famously arrogant gesture, sent 2 swords to the Polish and Lithuanian commanders, taunting them for hiding in the woods and inviting them to battle. When the armies finally met, the Knights were supremely confident. Their army was smaller, but it was better armed, better armored, and composed of some of the finest professional soldiers in Christendom. The battle was a brutal, swirling melee that lasted for hours. A key moment came when the Lithuanian cavalry appeared to break and flee. The Knights, believing the battle was won, broke their disciplined formation and gave chase. It was a trap. The feigned retreat had drawn them onto broken ground, and now the Polish heavy cavalry slammed into their flank while the Lithuanians turned and re-engaged. The Teutonic army was surrounded. The end was a slaughter. Trapped and disorganized, the Knights were cut down. The Grand Master himself was killed, along with hundreds of the elite Knight brothers who formed the core of the Order's leadership. By the end of the day, the most feared army in Northern Europe had been annihilated. The myth of Teutonic invincibility lay shattered and bleeding in the mud alongside its masters. Though the Order was not immediately destroyed, the Battle of Grunwald was a wound from which it would never recover. The cost of the war in ransoming captured Knights and in lost territory bankrupted the state. Their military prestige was gone, and recruitment from Germany dried up. The defeat emboldened their subjects in Prussia, leading to the formation of the Prussian Confederation, which openly rebelled against the Knights' rule. The following decades saw the steady decline of the Order's power. In the 13 Years' War, the rebellious Prussian cities allied with Poland, and the Knights were decisively defeated again. The second piece of thorn in 1466 was a humiliation. The Order was forced to cede Western Prussia to Poland and become a Polish vassal. Their once mighty state was now a rump, a shadow of its former glory. The final chapter came with the Protestant Reformation. In 1525, the Grand Master of the time, Albert of Brandenburg, converted to Lutheranism. He secularized the Order's remaining territory, transforming the Ordensstaat into the secular Duchy of Prussia, a fief of the Polish crown. The monastic state, born from a Catholic crusade, was dissolved by a Protestant prince. The Teutonic Knights' grand project in the Baltic was officially over. The Order itself did not vanish completely. It survived in a much reduced form within the Holy Roman Empire, returning to its charitable and ceremonial roots. But its time as a major political and military power was a distant memory. The black cross on a white field, once a symbol of terror and conquest, became little more than a historical curiosity. a relic of a bygone age of crusading fervor. The legacy of the Teutonic Knights is complex and controversial. In Germany, they were later romanticized as pioneers who brought civilization and Christianity to the East. In Poland and Lithuania, they are remembered as brutal invaders and land-hungry aggressors who used religion as a cloak for conquest. Both views contain an element of truth. They were both pious monks and ruthless conquerors, builders of magnificent castles and destroyers of entire cultures. Their story is a powerful lesson in how institutions can be corrupted by their own success. An order founded on service and humility grew into an arrogant and expansionist power that made enemies of the very people it was meant to protect. Their ultimate failure was an inability to adapt when their crusading purpose disappeared. They clung to a mission that no longer existed, and in doing so, they sealed their own doom. History is not a gentle tide, but a series of violent collisions, moments like the charge at Grunwald, where the course of centuries is decided in a few bloody hours. The Teutonic Knights, who had for so long been the hammer of history in Northern Europe, found themselves on that day to be the anvil. Their defeat was not just a military loss, it was the inevitable consequence of a holy mission that had devolved into a simple and ultimately fatal lust for earthly power.